Okay, here we are for part two of our lecture on FDR's first New Deal. And we got through bank failures and how he solved those problems. The second thing that he attacked was the stock market failure and the abuses of the stock market. Okay? And so what you want to put in the blank there is that the New Deal sought to curb the abuses of the stock market. And in actuality, the uh, that there was an attempt to do that before the crash, but it wasn't a very earnest attempt, and it was probably too much too late. They realized that practice of buying on margin, right? Um, Putting 10% down and allowing your stockbroker to pay the rest was not a good deal, and they tried to curb that, but it was too little, too late. All right. Well, first thing that they did is they passed the Federal Securities Act. That's what number one is. Federal Securities Act to correct the abuses of the stock market. It forced corporations and companies to share certain financial information with the public. And then we need to add, it established the SEC. It established the SEC. And the SEC is, and that's number two, the Securities Exchange Commission. The Securities Exchange Commission. These, and let's just work on number two. The Securities Exchange Commission was established to regulate and watch over the stock market to make sure investors and stockbrokers were not cheating, in a sense. They were the stock market police. And that's what I call the Securities Exchange Commission, the stock market police. So a couple things. Excuse me, just saying here. Um, if you invest in the stock market now, because of the Federal Securities Act, uh, every time your company makes a buys or trades or sell, they have to inform you in writing, and now emails if you want, but writing. Guys, I am not a stock market player, but I do have a what do they call that? I have a little money invested in the stock market, and every month I throw away books and books of paper information that means absolutely nothing to me, but they have to send it to me because of what happened in the 1920s when people, as FDR put it, were speculating with other people's money. And now, I mean, I get, this is reports. This is like 1 or 2 months report, and this is not. I get 4 books, and they have to tell me every little penny that they spent of my money. And I mean, let's say I buy $100 worth of stock a month, right? Okay, we spent $2.50 on this stock, and we spent $1.75 on this one, and we bought 6 cents of this stock. And they go through the whole entire $100 penny at a time and tell me what stock they bought with my money. It's like, I get it, and I just shred it up and throw it in the fireplace each month because I don't care, right? All I care is the bottom line is how much money did I make in the stock market this month. Okay? But they have to do it because they must disclose how they're spending my money. That way it's my fault. If I don't check on it, they told me, and I just have to follow up and check on it. Securities Exchange Commission got famous probably 8 years ago when a very famous TV personality, Martha Stewart, got caught cheating in the stock market. Okay? And some of you may know her. She's a home interior decorator. She has her own company and very, very famous in interior decorating, what to eat for Thanksgiving and all this kind of stuff. So if you know who Martha Stewart is. But the bottom line is her stockbroker gave her a tip that her stock market, that the stock that she owned in a company was going to take a dive. And he called her and said, Martha, sell every bit of stock that you have now. Okay? Oh, and don't tell anybody we talked. Click. Okay? And that's called insider trading. Okay? She did sell all of her stock, and by doing that, she avoided $50,000 in losses. Right? But nobody else got the phone call. Just she got the phone call from her, and that's not fair, right? If you're going to call one of your customers, you got to call all of your customers, not just the famous ones that are TV personalities. type of a deal. Well, the Securities Exchange Commission said, this looks fishy. She sold all of her stock the day before it sold. All of her stock the day before it sold. And they made a couple phone calls and they interviewed Martha, and eventually she cracked and told them, yeah, my stockbroker told me the day before, and they both spent time in prison. Okay? And so some heavy penalty. Anyway, that's an example of what the stock market police do, the Securities Exchange Commission. All right, on the back side of your notes. Third problem, of course, is unemployment. Actually, it was the #1 problem of the Great Depression, was unemployment. So the New Deal sought to create jobs and put people back to work. The best way they did it, the best program was the Public Works Administration, which created jobs through public works projects. They built parks, they built sidewalks, they built buildings, they built pools. I grew up in Atwater, and if your parents went to Atwater, they will remember the Atwater Plunge was the little pool down next to Osborne Park. And I remember the little plaque on the front that this is a Public Works Administration's project, 1933. So they built that pool in 1933. I don't know it for sure, but my guess is the pool in McNamara Park was probably built in 1933 as well. In some of the older sections of the city, class, if you stop at the corner, like over by the courthouse, West 21st, West 22nd Street, that there's a chance that on the corner slab will be a little stamp marked PWA 1933, which meant that sidewalk was built with PWA funds, putting people back to work. And they just, created jobs simply to put people back to work and give them a paycheck so they can make and meet jobs wide. Okay? So Public Works Administration is one, the PWA. The Civilian Conservation Corps, #2, was one of FDR's most successful job programs. Had some limits to it. It provided jobs for young men ages 17 to 25. So this is not a women's program. Right? And what they did is they took young men out of the city that were starting to cause trouble. Right? When times get hard, they'll start doing things, stealing, joining gangs, that kind of stuff. Right? And in a sense, it was as if they were in the army. Okay? They recruited them, and then from the cities, they would take them out to the national parks, where they would do all kinds of outdoor work. Building hiking paths, creating campsites, clearing brush, fighting fires, whatever it is, right? But here's the deal, class. They're going to get a paycheck, and you're out in the middle of the boondoggers. So what do you need the paycheck for? Nothing. So 90% of that paycheck would go back to their parents or their families in the cities, right? And they got 10% to use, for whatever they needed it out there in the middle of the boondocks, which wasn't much, all right? So basically took street thugs off the streets, gave them a job. Okay, I mean, it's like the army. You wake up in the morning, you do calisthenics. And then from calisthenics, you get breakfast. After breakfast, you form up your work crews, and the boss tells you where you're going to go. And you work all day, bring your sack lunch and all that kind of stuff. And the government pays for it all. So in terms of creativity, it was a very, very creative idea for putting young men back to work, using their money to help their families back in the cities. Mom and dad had one less mouth to feed, and you get to help them out in that way. So the CCC was a very, very handy program. And there were other. I think there was also, in addition to a PWA, there was also a CWA. Okay? This is just the first New Deal. Right? There will be more works programs in the second New Deal, and we need to compare and contrast those. Get one more in here. Farm foreclosures. The New Deal sought to help farmers not lose their farms, okay, to stop farm foreclosures, if you will. And they did this through the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA. It gave farmers a subsidy, and there's a good vocabulary word, or money, not, double underline the word not, to plant crops. Hopefully this would solve the problem of overproduction, which would cause farm prices to rise, which isn't, to rise, okay? So we know that the problem was farmers had been too efficient, they created too many crops, the prices dropped. So how are we going to bring the prices back up? Telling the farmers not to plant certain crops. Okay? Paying the farmer not to grow certain crops. And you can imagine the farmer's suspicion as the government agent comes and say, hey, we don't want you to grow, we don't want you to plant half your field this year. Kind of looking at him like he's crazy. And we'll pay you not to grow it. You're going to pay me for not growing crops. What's the catch? And the bottom line is that they did it. Okay. Now, the important part here is this was one of two New Deal programs that were declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. And when we look at the Supreme Court lecture later, we'll talk about why it was declared unconstitutional. But right now, mark it with 3 stars, no, 4 stars, because it is one of the programs that was declared unconstitutional. All right? I'm going to go ahead and stop right now, and we'll pick up the lecture in just a minute. Okay? Part 3 coming up.